are these people?
Who are these people? Well, this time it's Indy. Hi, everybody. And I'm bringing our buddy, the Dissident, back for another conversation, another one-on-one, to talk about some of the articles and the things that he talks about in his newsletter, the 307.substack.com. So welcome, Dissident.
Thanks
What's up,
for
bro?
having me. Doing well. How have you been?
No, I'm crazy busy. I'm happy to have my house back after a decent Memorial Day weekend of 6 days where they sent the kids home and told us, hey, you guys figure out what to do with them for 6 days. That was fun.
Oh, man, really?
And try to follow the news and run a network while not really trying to work at the same time. It's a fun challenge, let me tell you.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
So again, I want to talk about some of the articles that you've been writing lately, some of the things that you've been observing, just to show people what your Substack looks like. That is here again, the 307.substack.com. Most recent articles, again, you've been pumping them out, I noticed. So far this year,
I've been doing a lot.
This month, it looks like you've been averaging about one a day, right?
Probably about that, yeah. It depends. Like if it's shorter, like news stories, I'll do about one a day, and then if it's like longer pieces, like the Free Press one, I'll work a couple days on that, and then like take a break afterwards.
I don't blame you after that. And yeah, so what we see sometimes is you'll drop 2 or 3 in a shot, and then there'll be none for a couple days. This one I thought was pretty interesting about Twitter blocking the searches on Elias Rodriguez. Now, I've got questions. When I covered this on the show Sunday night, I talked about how I thought this was a psyop. Not that he didn't do it, not that what happened didn't necessarily happen the way it did, but the way that psyops are designed to work, it's misleading. It's to misdirect. And I think it actually accomplished that in the way that it changed the entire narrative within a day. The front page of Google was dedicated to that and not the story that had happened the day before. And the story that had happened the day before was that the IDF had fired on European diplomats in the West Bank, in Jenin. And a lot of people were calling for condemnations and calling for Israel to be, I don't know about censored, but they were certainly a lot of conversation about why were they shooting at diplomats. And then this happened, and literally the entire that disappeared off the front page of every newspaper and every website. So that's what I meant by the fact that I thought it was a psyop. Who orchestrated it, I have no idea. Although, look at who benefits from it. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I agree with you on the timing being weird. I've looked into as much as I can this Elias Rodriguez guy's background. I personally haven't come across any evidence that it was like some kind of setup. I'm not saying it wasn't. I just haven't seen the proof of it. I mean, I don't know. I think even just taking it at face value, the psyop element is that they sort of, the Israel lobby is trying to present it as sort of like an anti-Semitic hate crime, when if you look at the stuff that he's allegedly published, none of it has to do with hatred of Judaism or hatred of Jewish people. It's all about the genocide in Gaza. And so, I really don't know. I mean, we'll have to wait to see if more comes out. I mean, this particular story was about X blocking any searches of his name or the Twitter account that was alleged to be him, where he published his manifesto, which was later published by journalist Ken Klippenstein at his Substack. I mean, I think part of that is also like they just want to block, like they want to paint this as like an anti-Semitic hate crime. And so they don't want people like reading his manifesto to see that it was actually about Palestine and about Gaza. But, I don't know. I wouldn't put anything past the Israeli government at this point. I mean, there's been a million lies about what happened on October 7th, whether it's the mass rape claim or the 40 beheaded babies claim. And I mean, Netanyahu is certainly very good at manipulating public opinion, whether it was pushing for the war in Iraq, the proxy war in Syria, whether it's him doing the what he calls force the failure, where he sabotages peace negotiations and makes it look like it was the Palestinians that did it when it
Yeah,
was
turns
really
around, blames
him. And so
Palestinians. Yep. But blames
yeah,
Hamas.
exactly. And so, I mean, and even with the, they put out this fake story about how the Bibas family died and, claimed Hamas killed them with their bare hands. And even the lawyer for the family had to send a cease and desist letter to the Netanyahu government. And there was a Israeli forensic researcher that suggested they were actually killed through the Hannibal Directive by Israel. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, we really are dealing with a government that, doesn't have a red line and will lie about anything. And so I think anything that furthers that narrative, you certainly have to bring into question. I haven't yet seen anything definitively that shows there was anything going on here, but
No,
I
not
wouldn't.
yet. I'm still adding all this up. But first of all, the fact that, again, let's look at that picture again. First of all, we've seen how cops treat pro-Palestine protesters, okay? The anti-genocide protesters, all right? And they don't treat them with kid gloves. Let's put it that way. They rough them up. So this guy murdered 2 Zionists at the Holocaust Museum, and he's perfectly fine and allowed to scream Free Palestine, and then just left to sit there right in front of a glass door so everybody can take photos of him. Huh. That's not weird. That's not weird at all, is it? They're deporting people to CCOT for being pro-Palestinian and organizing protests in campus. That doesn't. It's really strange to me. And then there was the whole kafia on the ground thing where someone was allowed to kind of pick it up and walk away with it. That was a little strange. And then there's the whole Christian Zionist end. This is what I also think a lot of people have not really picked up on. Now, first of all, then you can't necessarily paint it as anti-Semitism, even though technically he thought he was going to an Israel supporting thing, right? So did he know that guy was a Christian? No, he probably thought that he was Israeli or in the IDF, which he was. He was an IDF. He was serving in the IDF, a Christian Zionist American serving in the IDF. This checks so many boxes for Israel. He's Christian, which upsets the Christian American front, okay? But also gets them, in a way, maybe turning against Israel. But no, they're going to claim that it was because of the Palestinians and because of Hamas that he did this, not because of what Israel is doing. But remember that they turn around and blame October 7th and everything on what the Palestinians have done, and it's all their fault. So this plays into that set of narratives that now they're murdering Jews. They're murdering IDF protectors of the Israeli embassy in this case. All right. I think that it's a way to potentially bring Christians, American Christians, into this on their side as part of the psyop, potentially as a side benefit. Obviously, they wanted to change the narrative within the press because condemnation of what Israel is doing in the West Bank, specifically where they were not attacked, where there is no Hamas. There's no excuse for the land grab that they're doing right there. And nobody's really speaking out against that because they're too busy watching concentration camps literally happen in Gaza. So it's kind of like they're doing both things at once, and people can only really absorb so much horror. What do you think about the Christian angle?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at least it's going to be used like that for sure. And I think you make a good broader point, which is that, and look, I'm against all violence. I'm not an anti-war guy. I don't like violence. I don't support any kind of shootings. But, you have the media covering this story extensively and, being very outraged, but there's no outrage about the unfolding genocide in Gaza or the constant murder of Palestinians in the West Bank from psychotic settlers, where the Israeli government just turns a blind eye to everything they do. And so, it's even like, and I totally agree with all of your questions about how weird the timing is on this, but I think even just as a broader point, like just looking at media manipulation, and I mean, there's been so many. I heard a lot of people have pointed out that was an Israeli tourist or something that saw another Israeli and thought they were Palestinian and killed them.
That was in
didn't really
Miami.
get that was in Miami. Yeah, that didn't really get national media attention. I mean, there's been so many, murderous hate crimes from Zionists against Palestinians that maybe make a headline or two, but they don't make the cable news and the New York Times for a week long.
There was this photo from literally yesterday that was horrifying. This is they're penning them in and making them get digital IDs and digitally identified in order to get food. And then apparently the IDF opened fire on those people inside there. Like they're supposed to be able to go anywhere. And oh yeah, that's barbed wire fence, I believe, in between.
Jesus.
Yeah. Really, like, wow.
Yeah, that's
crazy stuff. And again, so
wild.
when you see this, what happened to the diplomats that were shot at in Jenin? Now they weren't hit. I played the video. It's only 15 seconds. You hear the gunfire and everyone kind of ushers them away. And it's like, hey, let's get out of here. But the IDF even admitted that they did it, and they apologized and said, "Oh, our bad. We thought they were Palestinians." Why are you shooting at Palestinians in the West Bank? They never even had an answer for that because nobody's holding them accountable to that. By the way, that was a Matt Kennard tweet. Formerly declassified, now doing his own stuff, freelancing.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. I like Matt Kennard.
Yes.
No, I mean even Smotrich is openly saying, like, within this Likud term, we're gonna annex the West Bank. He's openly talked about this Gaza ethnic cleansing plan and saying we're gonna completely drive Palestinians out to the south of Gaza and completely flatten the rest of it. And they're going to have nowhere to go, and so they're going to be forced to leave. And this is something he said to a group of settlers in the West Bank. And he said, this is the finance minister for the Netanyahu government, and he said we're going to annex the West Bank in this term as well. So I mean, it's all part of this. What's been the plan from the beginning to build this, greater Israel, going well before October 7th, but really. Yep. Weeks before October 7th, you literally have Netanyahu giving a speech at the UN where he puts up this plan for this greater Israel. And he says, normalizing with Saudi Arabia through the Abraham Accords is going to be the linchpin of it. And he puts up a map of Israel where Gaza and the West Bank aren't on it, and they're incorporated into Israel. So, I mean, this has been, and I mean, even if you want to go back, you can go back to when he first got in 1996, the clean break document, which was written by a number of influential figures in the Israel lobby in America and sent to Netanyahu. And the clean break was basically, okay, you break with the idea of a two-state solution with Palestinians, and you break with the Oslo Accords, and you completely go into the Palestinian areas in Gaza and the West Bank and then take out all your enemies. And so specifically it was removing Saddam Hussein in Iraq and weakening Syria. And so this has really been, the sort of founding document for American and Israeli foreign policy in the Middle East since Netanyahu first came to power. There's been this propaganda campaign from Zionists where they try to claim Palestinians didn't accept the Oslo Accords. That's not true at all. What actually happened is Netanyahu completely sabotaged them. And he's on tape. I covered an article on this. He's on tape bragging about doing this in his first term from 1996 to 1999. He basically said he wouldn't sign anything unless the Bill Clinton administration let him decide what was a predefined military zone in the West Bank. And then this is another a leaked video where he's talking to settlers in the West Bank, and he's like, yeah, then I can call whatever I want a predefined military zone. So basically it completely destroys the prospect of a Palestinian state, because he can just say, well, this is a predefined military zone and take whatever he wants, set up settlements wherever he wants in the West Bank. And he on record in this video saying at that moment, I de facto put an end to the Oslo Accords. So then this is exactly what the clean break document called for. Then moving on to the war in Iraq, Netanyahu totally pushed the WMD deception, even testifying in Congress saying there's no doubt that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, and writing op-eds and I think the Wall Street Journal about it. And if you read John Mearsheimer and Stephen Waltz, the political scientist study on the Israel lobby, they talk about, Israeli intelligence pushing for the Iraq war and working with American and British intelligence to push the WMD deception. And again, it was because at the time Iraq was supportive of Palestinian resistance groups. And so that's why Israel's pushed for this. And, it's the same thing on Syria. There's a WikiLeaks email from Jake Sullivan saying, Israel wants, this is, I think, in 2012, saying Israel wants regime change in Syria.
Right.
Because then they think it's going to draw Iran in, it's going to cause, sectarian divisions. And actually, there's a Jeffrey Sachs at a recent conference in Turkey. He worked for Kofi Annan, who was the Arab envoy at the UN, and he said Israel was pushing for the dirty war in Syria, and Kofi basically arranged like a ceasefire, and every party agreed except the US because they continued this regime change. So then there was also the whole red line debate in 2013, where reportedly that originally comes from Israeli intelligence as well. There's actually a Wall Street Journal article where they cite a Israeli intelligence official coming up with the term red line. So then in 2012, Obama, publicly says if the Syrian government uses chemical weapons, it's a red line and we're going to have to intervene. And then there was this very questionable attack in Ghouta in 2013 where there's been a number of ballistic analysis that suggest it came from rebel-controlled territory. And there was even, if you read Charles Glass, who's a reporter, there was even a former U.S. ambassador to the Middle East who said the red line comment was an invitation for a false flag. And so they basically, the U.S. comes out publicly and says, we have this evidence that the Syrian government did this attack. Reportedly behind the scenes, they were like, no, we don't. Apparently, James Clapper said this is no slam dunk, which was a reference to the Iraq WMD deception. There's a long article, you can go look it up, from Seymour Hersh on this called Obama's Red Line or something like that. Just look up Seymour Hersh, Syria, London Review Books, and he basically says there was an intercept where they claimed, well, this proves that the Syrian government did this sarin attack in Ghouta. But then there were like people inside saying it was this was manipulated. This intercept came after the attack happened, and the timing was changed to make it look like it came from before. That intercept came from, according to The Guardian, the Netanyahu government. There's an article from the time in the government that says the bulk of intelligence, including this intercept, which Sy Hersh reported was manipulated, came from the Israeli government. And so, after this happened, obviously Operation Timber Sycamore got launched. Before, they were basically funneling weapons from Gaddafi, who Netanyahu also supported the overthrow of. He was gone now. They were funneling his weapons into so-called moderate rebels in Syria who were basically tied to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Then in 2013, they just started directly doing that until 2017, and then put like starvation sanctions on Syria, which led to the regime change that happened last year. And now Syria is run by sectarian extremists that are committing massacres. But I mean,
and that was another article you wrote, by the way, how Trump ended up shaking hands with Jelani and tried to give him respectability.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
We can take a look at that in a little bit. You also talked in this article, by the way, what you're talking about a lot is coming from this article, how Israel and the United States paved the way for the Gaza and the cleansing plan, which kind of breaks down the history and then we haven't even gotten to the section about the long-term plan for Gaza, which does not include the Palestinian people. We know that. I don't know if you have the Ynet report from 2024. We covered an article that showed how it was, they intended it to be like a city that was not controlled by Israel, but had input from a bunch of different internationals, almost like a Dubai, an Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I didn't actually include that into this report, but I can get into the long-term plan for Gaza. I mean, this all ties into this like clean break strategy. So point is, Netanyahu destroyed the Oslo Accords, pushed for the Iraq war. He was out of power at that point, but Ariel Sharon, who was also Likud, was in power, and he also pushed for it. And then Netanyahu obviously also pushed for the interventions in Libya and the CIA proxy / dirty war in Syria, and all the different intelligence deceptions that were used to justify all these things. But yeah, getting into the plan for Gaza, they officially left Gaza in 2005. They withdrew troops and the illegal settlements in Gaza, but they didn't actually leave. So basically, this is around the Iraq war time. So W. Bush pushed for elections in Gaza. They voted for the Hamas party. The Bush administration basically reneged on this, and so they trained members of Fatah, which is the Palestinian Authority, in Egypt for a coup attempt against Hamas after they were elected. And Hamas ended up winning during this fighting and completely taking over. But during this time, there's actually an email on WikiLeaks where Amos Yeldon, I think the head of Israeli intelligence, is quoted saying they want Hamas to win because then they can treat all of Gaza as a hostile entity. And so they've wanted this from the beginning, and they've used it to justify what they've openly called, disgustingly, putting the Palestinians on a diet. So
starvation plus, they call it.
Yes, exactly. And so they put this blockade on Gaza in 2007, where it basically just gives people like the absolute bare minimum to live. But, it caused mass unemployment. I think over 90% of the water was unsafe for human consumption. They only had electricity for 2 hours a day. Children were anemic. There was, I think, 15% of children had birth defects from the lack of food. It's just horrible stuff. And they not only did this, but they basically mass murdered civilians anytime Palestinians resisted this, either with force or peacefully. So in 2008, they killed over 1,000 civilians. 2014, they killed over 1,000 Palestinians, the majority civilians, including many women and children. And I mean, the final nail in the coffin was 2018, the Great March of Return, where there was a almost entirely peaceful demonstration against the blockade from Palestinians in Gaza. And as a UN fact-finding report on Israel's response to it, they killed over 200 civilians in response to this peaceful protest, and they injured thousands. And when I say injured, I don't mean like a scratch. I mean people like have their legs blown off for life.
Yep.
And the UN report quoted, this is a fact-finding mission, and they said they targeted women, children, civilians, the elderly, and disabled people. And so the 2018 protest basically, gave the impression in Gaza that peaceful resistance is pointless because you're still going to be killed by Israel. And so, I mean, the final nail in the coffin before October 7th was the Abraham Accords, which I think so many people misunderstand. Like, it really gets presented as like a peace deal. It's not that at all. This was negotiated through the Trump administration and Netanyahu, with Jared Kushner as the mastermind behind it. It basically got Israel to normalize with Bahrain, Qatar, Sudan, and Morocco. And so the point was not for peace, the point was, all of these countries before said we won't normalize unless you lift the blockade on Gaza, unless you get rid of the settlements in the West Bank, and unless you agree to the existence of a Palestinian state. What the Abraham Accords did is it basically got powerful states in the Middle East to abandon that and normalize Israel, completely sidelining any concessions for the Palestinians. And so that Netanyahu's big thing, the next thing was, we're going to get Saudi Arabia to sign on. And as I said earlier, there was the speech he gave at the UN, I think 2 weeks before October 7th, where he put up the map where he annexed Gaza, Israel annexed Gaza and the West Bank, and he said normalizing with Saudi Arabia is going to be the linchpin for this. And so it's like, this is all the history, some of the history that, led up to October 7th, which just got completely disappeared from the mainstream media. They just presented it as, they just woke up one day and decided to attack Israel. There was wasn't provoked at all. And of course there was all this history and more. And a lot of it got into this article. And obviously, there's so many examples of Israel seemingly deliberately ignoring intelligence to allow the October 7th attacks to happen, and just, endless atrocity propaganda. We don't know how many people they killed themselves through the Hannibal Directive, but we do know that they ordered it, and they gave the order to, and this has been reported in Haaretz and ABC News, they've given the order to turn the border fence into Gaza into a killing zone, and they open-fired the complete ammunition of 28 Apache helicopters at every single vehicle, many of which contained several hostages. So, I mean, I don't think Israel's ever going to allow an investigation into what actually happened on October 7th, but, they certainly killed, at least hundreds of their own people through that. And then obviously you have the ridiculous 40 beheaded babies hoax and the
all the Zaka lies that went with that.
Yeah, all the Zaka lies. What was the other one?
The rape lies and the
mass rape lies, exactly.
Zay Squirrel
so, all
has
this,
been all over that, sure.
Zay Squirrel's done a phenomenal job debunking this. But I mean, this was all the other thing that completely gets ignored is, the Zionist narrative is, they always say, well, Hamas could have released the hostages. There was a former Israeli spokesman named Haim Rubenstein who actually revealed that Hamas, shortly after October 7th, offered to release all the hostages if Netanyahu and the Israeli government didn't enter Gaza, and Netanyahu and the Israeli government rejected it.
Yep.
And so and because they've wanted this to happen, like, it's been the plan the whole time, as shown by Netanyahu's announcement at the UN that he wanted to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And so, then the Gaza genocide begins, completely backed by the Biden administration. There's a crazy special that was on Israeli channel 13, I think, or 14, which I covered, where they basically get into the behind the scenes of the Biden administration and Israel. And you have, like, Jake Sullivan saying, I'll support Israel no matter what they say or do, even if they go after the president I work for or the United States. You have the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. saying Biden was a gift to Israel.
Yep.
Because he never said ceasefire now, and he could have. You have the former U.S. ambassador to Israel bragging, saying, I get mad when people say Biden wasn't pro-Zionist and pro-Israel enough because he backed them the entire time. And even when it came to the election and it would have helped him politically to stop it, he didn't. Like, these are direct quotes in this psychotic special. And they also reveal that the Biden administration lied about who was blocking peace or a ceasefire deal this entire time. They talk about Netanyahu intentionally leaving Israeli forces near the Philadelphia corridor to block a ceasefire deal. They talk about Netanyahu refusing to give any concessions to Palestinians, to Saudi Arabia to block, because that's not the point for Israel to normalize with Saudi Arabia. Like, they want to normalize without any concessions to the Palestinians. And so and I mean, there's no denying now that Israel was just mass murdering civilians in Gaza since October 7th to make the place unlivable. I mean, you've got over 40 doctors led by Feroz Sidwa saying they've seen children intentionally shot in the head and chest. You've got a bombshell UN Human Rights Council report
Mm-hmm.
talking about the attacks on women's shelters and hospitals and fertility clinics, which even the UN Human Rights Council defines as an act of genocide in the report, as well as the actual mass rape of Palestinian detainees. You've got I've covered Netanyahu. I think this was in, I believe, Ynet, but it could have been another Israeli paper.
No, it was Ynet. I was just
It
showing
was
it here.
Ynet. Okay,
This is
so
what you're
yeah,
talking about.
there's a report in Ynet where apparently Netanyahu banged on the table and said, "Bomb houses. I don't care about military targets."
Yep.
I mean, there's no, and then you've got, the UN report where 70% of the casualties are women and children. You've got the Euromed Monitor report where they found that 9 out of every 10 person killed by Israel in Gaza was a civilian. I mean,
Civilian, yeah.
they don't even.
It's that's
They
like
don't even
Daniel
deny-
Hale. That reminds me of Daniel Hale, who whistle blew that 9 out of 10 people killed in Obama's drone program were civilians, and guess what happened to him? He ended up in jail for years in Leavenworth.
Yeah, exactly. That was the drone strikes in Afghanistan. He revealed that 90% of the casualties were civilians, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, obviously they prosecuted him under the Espionage Act, as they have all whistleblowers, and even eventually, as we know, Julian Assange, not even for blowing the whistle, just for publishing leaked documents. Um, but anyways, and so now then you have Biden administration who backed these genocidal war crimes the entire time. Then you have the Trump administration coming in, where reportedly early on, Stephen Witkoff actually did force a ceasefire, which Haaretz says Netanyahu repeatedly rejected for the past 6 months. And so we've got this ceasefire for a while. There's two phases to it. The first one is a withdraw of hostages in Gaza for Palestinian political prisoners in Israel, and the second phase is a full ceasefire and a full withdrawal. And so there's been, multiple insider Israeli sources that have talked to Haaretz and said that Netanyahu intentionally sabotaged the ceasefire deal that was working, because he refused to move onto the second phase. And you also have in the New York Times, like buried on like page 6 of an article, that it says something like Hamas's accusation for why the ceasefire's falling through is because Israel's not letting in the aid they're supposed to. And then it goes on to say, and 2 insider Israeli sources have confirmed that Hamas's claims are correct. And
Right.
meanwhile, Mariv, another Israeli newspaper, confirmed that the IDF admitted Hamas stuck to every term in the ceasefire. So
Yep.
Israel and the Netanyahu government unilaterally rejected the ceasefire. And instead of putting more pressure, the Trump administration signed off on a $3 billion arms sale to Israel, and even coordinated their bombing of Yemen with Israel's return to genocide, because
They wanted to
the Houthis
distract
were
from
the
the
last.
narrative. Huh. You mean Israel distracting from the narrative by committing some horrible thing, or in this case it was the United States distracting by doing something to deflect from what some horrible thing that Israel was doing? They did this at the Super Bowl too, by the way.
Absolutely, but I mean, even with Yemen, it's even more than that, and it's because the Houthis are really the last member of what is called the resistance axis that really had any threat to Israel's return to genocide in Gaza. And
Right.
what I find really weird is there's an article in the Institute for Responsible Statecraft by Michael Domino, who's Trump's top advisor in the Pentagon. And it's actually a
Mm-hmm.
really good article where he goes after Biden for bombing Yemen correctly, saying, the Red Sea, the Red Sea is not actually of that much economic interest to the United States. It doesn't cost that much more to go around it with the shipping, and also pointing out that the Houthis tie their blockade to the aid not getting into Gaza and the genocide in Gaza. And so he correctly said, if the Biden administration puts pressure on Israel to let aid into Gaza, the Houthis will end their blockade on the Red Sea. And now Trump did the exact same policy of bombing Yemen over this blockade that only existed because of Israel's return to the genocide in Gaza, instead of putting pressure on Israel to adhere to the ceasefire that they apparently pressured them to take in the first place.
And Ansarallah was not firing on American ships for the most part until Americans started to defend that shipping corridor or attack that shipping corridor, which does not belong to us. It's international waters. And then, but we also found that it caused an 85% drop in ships that ended up making it to Eilat, which was the big port in Israel. So it destroyed a lot of their imports and a lot of their shipping from the Far East. And it did not have much impact on America's interests in the Middle East. That, again, like this guy was saying, it didn't hurt us necessarily the way that it was happening, or American ships. What it was hurting was any ships that were going into Israel. And that's not even necessarily American interests. And if they had, just like the college campus stuff, I've been saying from over a year now, if they would stop dropping bombs on children, the kids would go home. They'd pack up their tents and go home. They don't want to sleep in tents in their $40,000 a year college campuses. Trust me, they don't.
Exactly. Like, there's just so many things in the news, both geopolitically and domestically, where, yeah, if you pressured Israel to let aid in and do a ceasefire, this would all go away. Whether it's what you're talking about, or whether it's, these groups in the Middle East that the U.S. either bombs or backs Israel bombing, whether it's Hezbollah or the Houthis. It's like what they're doing is attempting to put pressure on Israel to let aid in and to end the genocide. So if they let aid in and they ended the genocide, which they would with U.S. pressure, then this entire escalation would be over. But
right, but then they have to figure out what to do with the people that are still living there and alive, and no country has been willing to take them. They're trying to get them to go to Libya. They're trying to get them to go to South Sudan. They're trying to get them to go somewhere, some other country, to take these people in so they can now take the land, which they have spent the last 18 months bombing and clearing effectively to build their shining city on a hill in this little 2.5 mile strip where they've already been systematically taking land by chunks. First, they moved the line in by 1.5 miles, and now they've declared most of Gaza an annihilation zone. And now they're still not letting food or aid in. They're not letting. They're penning them in like we just saw, like animals, and then they're shooting at the people in the pens. So it's like, this is what you called it, unfortunately, and it was what Hitler called for the Jews, for the Jews in Israel, in Germany, the final solution. That's
exactly.
It's terrible, and this should not be happening. They don't want to let these people live. They don't want to let these people live in the country where they lived, where they were born, raised, and know. They want to deport them to some other country where they have no roots, no money, no connections, no nothing, and say, here, start over again. And just be lucky that you weren't one of the ones murdered. That's literally the deal that they're offering people.
Exactly. And so this is Israel's basically completely ripped the mask off of this whole operation, which has been the plan from the beginning. But what they're now calling Operation Gideon's Chariots, which is exactly what you're saying, is we're going to do a total blockade, starve everyone, completely force everyone into a tiny strip in the south of Gaza, destroy the rest of Gaza, and then they'll have nothing to go back to. And this is what Smotrich and even Netanyahu are openly saying now. And yeah, now that the Trump administration is working with them on that, apparently trying to deport them to, or force them into Libya, which used to be one of the more prosperous states in Africa until the U.S. and NATO helped destroy it through their regime change campaign in 2011, where they backed basically ISIS-tied rebels in overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi and turned it. There were now ISIS bases and open slave markets and civil war. I mean, it's a completely failed state now after that operation, which was based entirely on lies. Even the UK Parliament report uh, inquiry from the UK Parliament into what happened said that, all the claims that Gaddafi was, giving his troops Viagra to do mass rape and was going to do this massacre against civilians. It was total bullshit. It was completely made up by Western governments and these, extreme rebel groups. And the interest was entirely geopolitical and economic. It had nothing to do with, humanitarianism. Same with Yugoslavia in 1999, where the U.S. and under the Clinton administration and NATO intervened under the official line of helping Albanians in Kosovo, but it was
Right.
entirely geopolitically motivated. And so yeah, this is as you say the final solution to this genocide, which again
Well,
is always been the plan. I mean, this is why they're going after houses. This is why they're doing the total food blockade, which Yoav Gallant announced on day one, calling Palestinians human animals. Then this is why they're the majority of the casualties are civilians and women and children. They want to force the entire Palestinian population out of Gaza. But sorry, go ahead.
I also notice here that in the language that both Netanyahu and Smotrich are using, they're calling the people Gazans, the Gazan citizens. And, I saw a tweet the other day by Richard Medhurst, who's been persecuted all on his own because of his coverage of what's going on here, as well as Ukraine and everywhere else, but mostly for his support of the Palestinian people. He said they're trying to erase the word Palestinian. Okay, they want to call them Gazans. Don't call them Gazans. They're Palestinians, because if they erase the word Palestinian, people don't affiliate that with Palestine, which was the land that Israel stole, or was quote unquote gifted, and then murdered 6 million people that were peacefully living on before they got there. And these are the final, the relatives and the descendants of the people that survived all of these generations, these 77 years of occupation. And now they want to either expel or murder every one of those that are still left. 70, how many pages of children under the age of 1? And there's been ICC sanctions and, a lot of the citizens of the world screaming about this where they are able to. But a lot of silence from world leaders and no opposition militarily to any of this. Nobody's willing to stick their neck out to say that what you're doing is wrong, to step in and say, if you're going to do this to them, you're going to do this to us. And that's why it's allowed to happen, in my opinion. That because no country, and they've basically defanged every country that would potentially step up to help. They had a buffer in Syria. They had a slight buffer in Lebanon with Hezbollah. Those have now been, they stole the land. Not only did they bomb the area, but they stole the land in both the southern part of Syria and southern Lebanon. And the rest of the world has just kind of looked the other way or stood by and not been able to say anything, because they have the United States standing behind them going, well, if you say anything, you know what will happen to you. We'll send the CIA in. We'll send in NED. We'll destabilize your country. We'll put sanctions against you. And we'll make you an enemy in the corporate Western press. And look at what's happening to South Africa right now.
Exactly, and that that was completely retribution for the genocide case at the ICJ.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many important things in that report that South Africa compiled, where you have Israeli officials openly saying this now, but they cite so many Israeli Knesset members, commentators, and think tanks on Israeli TV, IDF soldiers, generals, just openly saying what, unfortunately, the majority of Jewish Israelis believe, which is that, the entirety of Gaza, they're all terrorists, they're all guilty, and so it's justified to murder civilians. So unfortunately, there was a really disturbing poll which was done at a Penn State University using a Israeli polling firm, which has a very good track record of accurately representing the public views. They've gotten elections right when no other poll has, or polling firm has. I think the 2015 election, they were the only one that called a Likud victory, which is what happened. And the poll took over 1,000 Israeli Jews from different areas as like a sample size. And yeah, it found that over 80% support the forced expulsion of Palestinians in Gaza. Over 50% support the forced expulsion of Israeli Arabs, Palestinians in Israel. And even 47% supported killing everyone when conquering territory, or when conquering a territory, killing all its inhabitants. And so, I mean, this is what the kind of views that have been mainstreamed in Israeli society. And we get all this propaganda in the West about human shields, or they're trying to mitigate civilian casualties, but that's just propaganda for the Western world to get the West to keep arming Israel. Like they know fully what they're doing domestically, and many unfortunately support it. They don't see Palestinians as humans, and they see them all as collectively guilty. And as you say, they don't even recognize that they exist as Palestinians in the sense that they call them Gazans, which Gaza is really just a population of displaced Palestinians from the Nakba in 1948. So yeah. I don't know,
and
where this is going to go, but it doesn't look good.
I think the next place to probably go would be to go to their propaganda, their chief propagandist, which would be, you did an extensive article about Barri Weiss and the Free Press and her background. And I got a little, I don't know. It's hard to say what the word is. It's not that I was triggered, but and you're not wrong in what you're saying here. Again, in that she is an effective propagandist. I'm going to skip to the bottom line is, you give her credit where credit is due. And man, when I read that at first, I got super upset. I'm like, I don't want to give her any credit for anything. And I get what you mean. Even the credit was a backhanded credit, because she did set out to connect her Zionist activism to her journalism. Well, it's not journalism. It's propagandizing. I wouldn't call it journalism at all. She did a good job of that. Yes, because she created a propaganda outlet that she calls journalism, but I would not refer to what she does as journalism. Able to successfully jump on the growing dissatisfaction with the mainstream media, use it to create an outlet that purported to be fearless and adversarial, all right, by differing from the mainstream media on some limited issues, exactly, cultural issues that really are not materially, impactful on society. A success for her through this, again, an outlet with over 1 million subscribers. I can't believe 155,000 paid subscribers. Where did you find that number?
It's linked to in the article. I believe it was a Financial Times article from a few months ago.
Wow. No, that was the one from October. I think I covered that on INA News. I did a podcast, a segment on INA News with Colin filling in for Reef last fall. It's the last time I was on there. And I brought this story, which wasn't really an article, but it was an assembling of the corporate cast-offs and the corporate infiltration that I saw as a continuation of something that we've been talking about for 2 years, where people in corporate media have seen how much business and readership and viewership they've been losing to Substack over the past 5 years. So they've decided to send their people over there, but they can't just show up like Steve Buscemi. Hey, how are you, fellow kids? They have to have like a drama or a story that leads them to want to be a dissident and join the dissident. Who's this guy, the dissident? And join the dissident media atmosphere over at Substack that challenges narratives. And that's kind of the reputation that Substack had built early on. Now, what we've seen, though, is that they've done a lot of recruiting of corporate media. They hired Catherine Valentine from the Washington Post to lead their politics coverage. They leaned very heavily into mainstream corporate media, mainstream corporate narratives, mainstream corporate personalities like Jim Acosta. I did a whole story about when Jim Acosta showed up at Substack. Van Jones. Van Jones was in the segment. It was Van Jones, it was Taylor Lorenz, and Anna Kasparian. It was right when Anna Kasparian got there that really led me to want to do this segment, because if even Anna's showing up, you know that Substack has kind of jumped the shark with dissident media, that now the oxygen in the room is being sucked up by the Heather Cox Richardsons and the Public by Michael Schellenberger, who has, by the way, turned to much more mainstreamy stuff and fear-mongering for boomers. Same thing with Taibbi, sadly enough, who's ignored this genocide for the most part, has had no condemnation for Israel on an ongoing basis, nor any desire to report on any of the specific atrocities or horrors that have been inflicted on the Palestinian people. I find that really questionable, and I've personally called him out on that, and I think he doesn't think he has anything to necessarily add to it. His voice would be enough. His readership, knowing what was happening regularly, would be enough, because I think a lot of them don't see it. But to play into this again is your piece about the free press and Barri Weiss, who has built one of the largest propaganda mainstream corporate outlets. And I love how you changed the free press to the AIPAC press.
Yeah.
I love that. That's one of my favorite graphics. I actually ended up using that on one of the thumbnails you saw. All right.
But yeah, I saw that.
They have over a million subs. Unreal. Like, this.
I can get into my article on the free press if you want.
Yeah, show me. Yeah, lead us through it, because I think a lot of people don't really know about Barri Weiss. They don't know why what her motivations were, and quite what she's built and its impact right now on the moneyed society. The people with money, they like her. They're subscribing to this. They're supporting this. Now, my feeling also is that I don't necessarily believe that 155,000 people subscribe paid, but even if they do, all right, that's what, 1.5 million per year, 1.75 million per year. All right. They value the outlet at almost $100 million or more. So if they're only generating 1.7 million a year in paid subscriber revenue, yet they're valued at over $100 million, is there a disconnect there?
Yeah, I mean, that's also a great question. I didn't really get into that, but no, I agree. I mean, I don't know for sure if they even do have that many paid subscribers, or if they're actual subscribers, or if it's just whatever, venture capitalists are funding it, like laundering it through different accounts. I'm just speculating here. I don't know this for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me. But getting into the stuff, I know for sure is, as you said, a lot of people I don't think really know what Barri Weiss's background was and what she did before starting the Free Press. But her father is Lou Weiss, who's, a very influential lobbyist with the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC. And so there's been a number of interviews with him, and I just got some quotes in my article. He said, "I voted for Bill Clinton once because I thought he would be good for Israel. I think Trump has done some real good. He's been absolutely terrific on Israel. Personally, I'm a conservative, but I've chosen to support those candidates that are good on the issue of Israel. That's my litmus test." So this was in an article that basically interviewed both of Barri Weiss's parents about their political differences. And her father basically said, I only care about Israel.
He's an Israel firster, right?
The definition of an Israel firster. And so he's worked very closely with AIPAC. There's an article in the Jewish Chronicle, him talking about the yearly AIPAC conference, where he says, "For a couple of decades, I've been coming with my wife and whichever daughter was available to participate. one of them being Barri Weiss. Talks about attending breakout sessions with Christian Zionists, African American Zionists, or Hispanic Zionists. And this is what he wrote. The highlight of the weekend is the trek to Capitol Hill to lobby on behalf of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Over the years, you get to know your congressman, which can be fun after you get over the lobbying butterflies. So this is what her father does. He's a complete Israel firster who works with AIPAC to lobby politicians to support sending arms and money to Israel, which is used to drop bombs on kids in Gaza and, support settlers in the West Bank.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just go on because there's another thing.
Oh, here.
Yeah, and then there was another article talking about AIPAC trying to primary Summer Lee, who's a Democratic representative.
Down in
They took issue
Philadelphia.
with her because she basically said Israel should let aid into Gaza, and AIPAC can't even have minimal criticism in government on Israel, as Thomas Massey's revealed. Every single Republican member of the House and the Senate has an AIPAC babysitter. One of the AIPAC babysitters is Barri Weiss's dad, and so on Sunday, Patel, who was the Bhavani Patel, who was the AIPAC-supported primary challenger to Summer Lee, met with Jewish community members in Pittsburgh to discuss the race at the home of Lou Weiss. So he's even been involved in these primary challenges against candidates that say anything remotely critical of Israel. And so, okay, so that's her dad. So, you could say, well, people aren't necessarily their parents. People will have, different views than their parents. And so, that's fair. You can't put all the views of their parents on a person, but Barri Weiss completely continued her father's legacy of doing everything in favor of securing American support for Israel. There's actually a really excellent article from Glenn Greenwald that he wrote back when he was at The Intercept, called "The New York Times Newest Op-Ed Hire, Barri Weiss Embodies His Worst Failings and Lack of Viewpoint Diversity." And, typical of Glenn Greenwald's a very thorough investigation. He uncovered a talk that Barri Weiss gave at a 2012 conference for the American Zionist movement, where she openly said, "My Zionism activism is connected to my journalism, and there's a connection I see between Zionism and storytelling." And so she basically talked about in this conference that she never cared about politics until she was at Columbia University, and she watched this movie called Columbia Unbecoming, which was this Israel lobby propaganda film that basically tried to demonize the entire Middle East department at Columbia and get them to fire professors that were critical of Israel. And it was so extensive that even the New York Civil Liberties Union had to come out and condemn it as a threat to free speech. And so this is where Barri got her political start, is trying to get professors fired for either being critical of Israel or being sympathetic to Palestinians' right to live.
And now it comes full circle to Columbia University. That was the spark where all the protests started. And the on-campus tent movement last year that spread like wildfire around the world, that started at Columbia University. That's where they worked with the NYPD and the Mossad and the government in order to coordinate a signal or some kind of a WhatsApp chat. And I talked with Gen X Girl about that, that there was a WhatsApp chat thread going with over 100 people, including Barri Weiss and some other very influential people and the NYPD, that were discussing what to do about Columbia University, and about the takeover of Hins Hall and then how they sent the cops in. Everything was coordinated. That there was the person that worked for the NYPD that was working at Columbia, but also had a liaison to Israel. That all came out of Columbia University. So I just wanted to mention that, while Weiss went to school there, this has been the linchpin of pro-Palestine activism for over a decade.
Yeah, and everything you're talking about there, like Barri Weiss took part in the original propaganda campaign that basically sparked the censorship we're seeing now at Columbia University.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how Barri Weiss continued her journalism career. Like she wrote articles trying to deny Abu El Haj, who was a Palestinian academic, tenure at Barnard
Right.
College. There was a campaign from an Israeli settler in the West Bank to try to get her denied tenure. She dug up an old tweet of Ilhan Omar where she said, Israel's hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people to help them see the evil doings of Israel. Pretty accurate statement if I've ever heard one, but she tried to use that to paint her as a anti-Semite, and she's also gone after Rashida Tlaib, who's the only Palestinian representative of Congress. And in that infamous clip, which I'm sure fans of the Jimmy Dore show are very familiar with, where she called, I think it's his most popular video, or one of his most popular videos, where Jimmy Dore just tore it to thread. It's very funny. Um, where she called Tulsi Gabbard an Assad toady and didn't even know what it meant. Just ridiculous. And I mean, Tulsi Gabbard's totally sold
what
out
does
now,
that
but she
mean?
at least
If I use that word correctly, Well, what does she mean? What exactly does that mean? Well, I specifically defined the other night what it means that Tulsi Gabbard, that Barri Weiss is a Netanyahu toady, and what that specifically meant. I am shameless about the fact that she is an awful human being who has openly been propagandizing on behalf of a murderous regime, and whitewashing war crimes, whitewashing baby murder, whitewashing burning people alive in tents, whitewashing all of it, and then pushing a fabricated rape story. Just the worst.
exactly.
The worst.
She's awful. But so then, this was basically her, like she tried to, as I said, get people primaried, deny people tenure, get professors fired, smear people as dictator apologists for opposing foreign wars. I mean, she was basically a cancel culture sniper for the Israel lobby. Then all of a sudden she becomes this figure against cancel culture from the what I guess would be called the left. I would call it like the neoliberal left, I guess. I mean, I don't really think
Right. Democrats
it's
ain't left.
actually. Yeah, no, exactly. But yeah, neoliberal Democrats, the sort of identity politics, cancel culture. And so you wrote this very famous article, Meet the Renegades of the Intellectual Dark Web, which is actually a really good book by the late Michael Brooks, where he really did a deep dive into Sam Harris and all these characters and all the abysmal things they've said over the years, called Against the Web, I think it was called. It was really interesting. But she promotes these like hardline Zionist as like reasonable alternatives, centrist alternatives to cancel culture. And so in this article, and so some of the people I listed were, Ben Shapiro, who in 2010 tweeted, Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage, hashtag settlements rock. And of course, he's so close to Netanyahu, he even posted a video of him eating dinner with him. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who I think is an ex-Muslim activist, who wrote in 2014, Benjamin Netanyahu deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for his bombing of Gaza, which killed 1,462 civilians, including 551 children and 299 women. So that deserves a Nobel Peace Prize, apparently. Sam Harris, who, I'm sure many people are familiar with and what a douchebag he is, but he wrote an article in 2014, Why I Don't Criticize Israel, where he admitted that Israel caused massive losses of innocent life, including women and children, and non-combatants, but said he won't criticize Israel because supposedly he claimed there's a moral difference between Israel and her enemies.
Right.
I agree in terms of Israel being the evil one, but that's not what he meant.
No.
Dave Rubin, who literally met with Netanyahu recently to, quote, push back against Israel trends in right-wing media. So him along with Tim Pool and a few other propaganda podcasters literally met with Netanyahu to try to like learn messaging to push back against criticism of Israel in the independent media space. I guess with them it would be on the right. Majid Nawaz, who Times of Israel describes as a staunch Israel ally. Jordan Peterson also ate dinner with Netanyahu on video and tweeted, "Give him hell, Netanyahu," before the genocide, and Douglas Murray, who I'm sure we're all familiar with. I'll get into more of him later. But and she went on to become this anti-cancel culture figure. And I mean, to be fair, like on a lot of that, there's so much hypocrisy. But yeah, sure, I agree with her in the sense of like her citing New York Times colleagues, like accusing her of microaggression for some really innocuous tweet where she said immigrants can do anything to I think an ice skater from Japan or something, but they weren't actually an immigrant. Like their parents were immigrants, and the New York Times colleagues had to make a group chat on that and say she was guilty of microaggressions. I mean, yeah, that's stupid, of course, but I don't think that's like some brave, you know, impressive opinion to recognize that annoying people are annoying. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't make you a brave journalist. And so, and then she also wrote this really strange book in 2019 after the neo-Nazi massacre at the Tree of Life synagogue, which apparently she went to when she was younger. Uh, and it was supposed to be like a book on the history of anti-Semitism, but again, she just used it to conflate actual anti-Semitism with people against murdering children in Palestine and anti-Zionists. And so she even attacked anti-Zionist Jews,
Yeah.
saying a very small but very vocal group of anti-Zionist Jews seem deeply opposed to Jewish interest and many of our community's enemies. I mean, that is actual anti-Semitism, pretending that the Israeli government's interests are Jewish interests.
Right. They're not. I'm not against Jews. I am one of those people that she is literally attacking. All right.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not disloyal. I'm not disloyal to Judaism. I'm not loyal to Israel because it is not my home country. It is not the way that Israel was supposed to be created in the first place. This is a manufacturing of trying to steal and recapture the homeland that has been quote unquote promised in the Bible. But where else in history has anyone ever been able to legally steal the land back that they claim was theirs 3,000 years ago and was stolen for them? I mean, the whole argument, and look, I said for a long time that the United States model for how they handled the Native Americans here is exactly how Israel has been behaving toward the Palestinian people, which was squeeze over time, let them die off, make it more and more difficult for them to live, squeeze them into smaller and smaller parcels of land over time, and eventually, in generations, they'll either be ineffective or completely nullified or gone. And that's horrible the way that they've done that. It's systematic, and I can't even imagine being on the other side of that and having that done to me. These people also could not. I mean, it's very typical that they're selfish and that they're looking out for their own interests and not looking out for the people around them. But what it also is doing is making Jews around the world less safe. What they're doing here is making me less safe. What they're doing is making it where I have to tell my kids to not say that they're Jewish in certain areas, because automatically people assume that if you say you're Jewish, you're an Israel supporter. Therefore, people that are unhappy with Israel then can say what they have to say about Israel to you and be upset and sometimes act out as a result of that, which we've seen multiple times, even from Israelis or Zionists themselves against other Zionists, where they were perceived to not be supporting Israel.
Well said. Exactly. And so, anyways, in this book that Barri Weiss wrote, she even like tried to smear anti-Zionist Jews as like only speaking out for social reasons, and said to be a good progressive increasingly requires distorting Jewish history and disavowing the Jewish state. And I quoted Aaron Mate and Norman Finkelstein talking about their family's experience with the Nazi Holocaust and why having a history of family members being killed and surviving atrocities led them to speak out against atrocities committed against the Palestinians. So again, just a crazy smear. And then she goes on in the book, calling Jeremy Corbyn an anti-Semite and saying that he transformed one of the country's great parties into a hub of Jew hatred, which was a complete psyop to try to purge the Labour Party of not just any anti-Zionists, but really any, anti-war people or just anti-establishment people. I mean, the Corbyn movement was a really promising thing that was, not just anti-Zionist, but just anti-imperialist across the board, and also for populist economic policies, and he's spoken out on issues like Julian Assange. So I mean, this whole thing was just a complete psyop to return the Labour Party to neoliberalism, which it did. I mean, the country's now led by Keir Starmer, who's a reincarnation of Tony Blair. And she even went even crazier, saying that anti-Zionists are part of a Soviet conspiracy, and that being opposed to the state of Israel is a Soviet lie, which is just insane.
Yeah, and I believe I've seen pictures of Putin with the Chabad members, and I think that I've read somewhere that he actually is Chabad. So it's just interesting. The minute that you start to question or deviate from their exact narrative, that's when they send their attack dog, and she has consistently been their attack dog for more than a decade, and for some reason she's effective in getting that message across. Now, part of it is that the people with the money amplify her, support her, and push her stuff out there so that people are forced to deal with it, number one. Number two, she says inflammatory stuff partly to generate a response, whether she even believes it or not. I think in this case, she does. She's that maniacal and lunatic. Like, really, some of her her statements are borderline genocidal themselves.
Well, I mean, and we can get in. I mean, this is the most disturbing part of the article is the next part. So I talk about her, setting up the free press, and I just give like a sample example of her mixing in like things that somewhat deviate on, as you said, like cultural issues from the mainstream media, but mixed in with Israel lobby propaganda. So just the example I cited was the end of 2022. It's like a highlight of the best writers, and so they highlight a column from Jay Bhattacharya that's deviates from the official narrative on lockdowns and mask mandates and vaccines and all the sort of COVID deceptions. But then they also mix that in with a column from Masha Anajad, who's sort of like a Washington Iranian regime change activist, who called for the toppling of the Iranian government, which is a top Netanyahu goal. And so this is pretty much the point of the outlet, is to draw people in on issues like COVID or cancel culture and then sell them, Zionist propaganda. And so that this is the most disturbing stuff the outlet's done, which is really horrific. So, we talked about all the Zaka hoaxes.
Yep.
The most ridiculous one was this idea that Hamas baked a baby in an oven. I mean, it's straight out of a Looney Tunes cartoon. And so Refaat Al-Areer, who was a really effective Palestinian academic and poet who got a lot of traction outside of Gaza. He was based in Gaza and really, I think, was really effective in making outsiders understand suffering in Gaza. He correctly mocked that atrocity propaganda for what it was, saying with or without baking powder, as a joke, because he knows it's not true, because it wasn't true. It was debunked by even Haaretz like days after it came out. So Barri Weiss took this out of context and wrote on Twitter, Refaat Al-Areer, let me find it. Sorry, 1 second. Let me find...
Where was that? Debunked as
Here we
a
go.
false claim.
Barri Weiss said he was joking about whether or not an Israeli baby burned alive in an oven was cooked with or without baking powder.
Here we go.
So Al-Areer's making fun of it because it's not true, because it's the dumbest piece of atrocity propaganda I've ever seen in my life. But Barri Weiss took that out of context to make it seem like he supported burning a baby in an oven. And so it gets worse. So he got threats from Israelis that followed Barri Weiss saying things like, send me your address, we're going to wipe you out in Gaza. And he tweeted this out, and this is his exact words: "If I get killed by Israeli bombs or my family is harmed, I blame Barri Weiss and her likes. Many maniacal Israeli soldiers already bombing Gaza take these lies and smears seriously and act upon them." And he was killed in December by a targeted strike from the IDF.
Yep.
And so this is the most disturbing stuff that Barri Weiss and the Free Press has done, is put out smears against specific people who are either journalists or academics in Gaza, speaking out on what's happening to them, that's used by the IDF to get them killed. It's not the only time.
Nope.
More recent time is there was this article they wrote, how Qatar bought America, which is just a joke. I mean, it's such an obvious way to distract from the Israel lobby and what they're doing. But the most horrific part of the article is they write, according to documents shared by the Israeli military last fall, at least 6 Al Jazeera journalists were active members of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. These documents are fake. They're staged by the IDF, and they're crudely staged. And so the Committee to Protect Journalists has uncovered a million examples of Israel faking documents to try to claim journalists are Hamas members to justify killing them. And so
one of the famous one, Daniel Hagari points to a calendar and goes, Hamas, Hamas. It was literally a schedule for the workers in the hospital, remember?
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's been a million examples of it, but one of the ones they tried to say that Ismail Al-Ghul, who was murdered by the IDF, was Hamas, and the fake documents, he was born in 1997. They tried to say he received a Hamas military ranking in 2007 when he would have been 10 years old.
Yep.
There was another example. They accused Hamza al-Duda and Mustafa Turaya of being terrorists after killing them, and then the Washington Post found that they actually looked at the drone footage and found that there's no indication either man was operating as anything other than a journalist that day. Nope. And so this is a complete fake, fabricated document. And one of the journalists on this document has actually been killed, Hossam Shabbat. Yes. And his family revealed how he was killed, and he was just like the other ones, operating as a journalist and targeted with an Israeli drone. And actually, he didn't even just work for Al Jazeera. He was a freelancer, so he also wrote for Dropsite News, Jeremy Scahill's outlet.
Yeah,
and Jeremy
garbage
Scahill
CIA bullshit place, but that's another story. Yes.
Well, I mean, put aside whether you like the outlet or not.
I don't.
Scahill. Okay, fair enough. But Scahill actually talked to Hamas and found that they looked at this when Israel put this document out, and found that not only was he not a sniper in Hamas, which is what Israel accused him of, he's never been a member of Hamas at all. And so and by the way, 5 of the 6 people on this fake document, which just functions as a kill list for journalists working in Gaza, are still living. So by publishing this, they're basically pushing propaganda that's going to be,
and they're targeting every other journalist. Look, they have systematically targeted over 200 journalists in Gaza and the West Bank since October 7th. More journalists than have been killed in every world war combined in history before this. They aren't even necessarily denying that they are targeting and murdering every single journalist, but not just the journalists, they're killing their entire family, which is another way to further discourage anybody else from potentially reporting on just how bad the atrocities that Israel are committing quite are on a daily basis. So yes, Hossam Shabbat, Reef and Colin covered his murder extensively on INN News, and the Hamza al-Dadu, his father is Wael al-Dadu, a Indie Media Award honoree, by the way, for being one of. Look, we had to recognize some of these Palestinian journalists that literally put their lives on the line and sacrificed themselves to tell us what was happening there, because Israel did not want that story getting out for anything at all. Even Abu Bakr al-Abed, he's now out, and he's been in Ireland, I believe, relatively safe. I'm sure Israel would like to target him and murder him wherever he is. I know they certainly tried to do it while he was in Gaza. I mean, I certainly would love to hear the story about exactly how they arranged to get him out when no one really gets out of Gaza, especially a journalist that isn't like on life support, basically. I got questions. I followed this guy's coverage. I love him to death. Not to death, but I love the coverage that he gave, and I feel for what he had to go through on a daily basis, reporting. The drones are overhead, and it's impossible to sleep. It was a nightmare beyond nightmares, and I'm glad that he's out and away from all of that. But I certainly have questions as to how that all went down, how he got out, and why he was able to get out. And Israel even had to have allowed him to get out because they know everything that happens in all of these territories. Let's call it for what it is. But yes, they also have systematically targeted journalists more than anywhere else. And that has also fallen silent, just like all of the other resistance that might have come from other countries and outrage. If their own journalists and civilians and citizens were targeted, they certainly would be outraged. But because it's Palestinian people and they don't have a leadership and their own country and an international standing for people to speak out on their behalf that isn't attempted to be silenced immediately by the largest powers in the world, they're not even considered to be, legitimate in those circles. They call it Pallywood a lot of times, that they're making up a lot of these. No, they're not making up tents being burned while people are alive inside of them. We're literally watching the cell phone video of it. So don't gaslight us and tell us that. They do it constantly, and it's maddening. But sorry, go ahead. I digress.
Exactly. No, well said. Exactly. And so, this is the most disturbing thing the Free Press has ever done is pushing out this Israeli propaganda, which is, as you say, used to target, the few people that are actually, heroic enough to document this genocide, because they don't let journalists in.
No.
When they do, it's propagandists like Douglas Murray who are going to repeat what the IDF says. So it's up to journalists in Gaza to document this genocide, and for an outlet called the Free Press to lie about the most heroic journalist on earth or documenting a genocide that's being done against them, and pushing lies that are used to justify killing them. It's so Orwellian. It's psychotic. But anyways, moving on to the Free Press's editorial line, their main foreign policy guy is this guy Eli Lake. People may have seen him debate Aaron Mate on the Ukraine proxy war recently, but he's just a pretty boilerplate down the line neocon. Like, he kept pushing the WMD deception long after it was debunked. He played a big part in Chaz Freeman being blocked as the head of National Intelligence Council in 2009, which was an Israel lobby-led smear. If you're not familiar with Chaz Freeman, was Nixon's ambassador to China and Bill Clinton's ambassador to Saudi Arabia, but actually a very reasonable guy on foreign policy, and he's taken a really good stance on issues like Gaza, Ukraine, Syria, Libya. Like, a lot of these things he's gotten right when everyone else in the foreign policy establishment's gotten wrong. And so when he withdrew, he wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed, where he said this was a deception from the Israel lobby because of my criticism of Israel. And reportedly, the National Review said that Eli Lake's quote-unquote reporting played a bigger part than anything on getting Freeman to withdraw. And supposedly, Eli Lake said he has connections to the Chinese and Saudi regimes. Yeah, he was ambassador to those countries. Like, what? Are you supposed to be the... Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
And this was 2009, and now what we see is... And it's really funny that he called out the aim of the lobby to control the policy process through the exercise of a veto over the appointment of people who dispute the wisdom of its views, the substitution of political correctness for analysis, and the exclusion of any and all options for decision by Americans and for our government other than those Israel favors. This literally sounds like a boilerplate for the Trump administration, and how they have, even in the first 4 months, systematically tried to expel any anti-Israel people or people who would question what Israel is doing or oppose Israel out of the ranks of the administration entirely. So I just find it interesting
Exactly,
that
exactly.
Chaz Freeman was like a canary in the coal mine. And again, I'm sure he's far from the first one that was lobbied against and did not get a position because Israel didn't want that. But Eli Lake and the Free Press, not at the time. Eli Lake was at the National Review, all right, which
At the
again,
National Review, yes.
highly conservative paper that Bill Kristol writes for. Also, that's Bill Kristol's outlet. So we see who Barri's connected with, the money that's around her, and the level of propaganda, and then the fact that the Israel lobby would support her because she is a Zionist propagandist. There's plenty of money there for her. Hey, do you realize that there's really not a whole lot of money out there to support anti-Zionists because those people end up murdered or regime changed or jailed or weird stuff ends up happening to them pretty often, I notice. I wonder why that is.
Well, I mean, especially in the UK, we can get into that after. But yeah, I mean, and Eli Lake has published at the Free Press a number of, basically genocide denial articles where he tries to say Israel's not blocking food aid into Gaza. I mean, as we've been talking about, they openly said the point even before October 7th was we're going to put Palestinians on a diet and leave them on the brink of starvation. Yoav Gallant openly said, we're putting a total food blockade. We're blocking fuel, food, medicine, because these are what he said human animals, which is just openly genocidal rhetoric. And there's been, I mean, and now they're even still denying the blockade, even when you've got like New York Times articles quoting IDF officials that are monitoring it, saying yes, people are on the brink of starvation in Gaza. Even still, the Free Press is publishing articles saying there's no famine in Gaza.
It's
So
crazy.
I guess all the pictures of starving children are
AI.
or,
It's all AI.
You know
it's
what
all
I mean?
made
Like,
up. Or it's all coming from some other country somewhere else. No. Don't believe your lying eyes. Believe us, the propagandists that literally work for the Israel lobby and are dedicated Zionists to make sure that no Palestinian voice ever gets out there, because she will specifically target them in the, on Twitter to make sure that that Israel will then use his location on his cell phone to target him and his entire family and drop a bomb on the house that they were sitting in. Now, they don't even have houses anymore. Now it's literally just dropping bombs on tents. They're setting fire to tents, which then burns the next tent next to it because they're all connected. They're not giving them anywhere to live. They're not giving them anywhere to survive. They're not letting food in. They're not letting water in. They're not letting medical supplies in. They killed they've killed the doctors and the nurses. I mean, there was that doctor where they killed her and 9 of her children of the 10, and 1 is surviving. And the world is just relatively silent. There's protests happening, but the people who have control over anything are either silent or complicit. And it's beyond madness and at some point there needs to be accountability. When there's a changeover in leadership, in sentiment. I remember Jonathan Cook played a video, and I played it on How Do We Miss That talked about 10 or 15 years from now, when we see all of the Palestinian Holocaust memorial museums that are built, and our grandchildren turn to us and say, what did you do to try to stop this and fight this? Because we did this to our grandparents for the Holocaust museums that were constructed. It's a very similar story, sadly. And, but at some point, Israel will have played its hand too badly, and it will turn around and we'll lose U.S. backing. It's already starting to at this point. And when it does...
and you even have Ehud Olmert, who's the former Israeli prime minister, who's no friend to Palestinians, writing an op-ed in Haaretz where he's acknowledging, yes, Israel is mass murdering and targeting civilians and committing war crimes, and without saying it, even hinting, yes, they're committing genocide. And he's not writing it out of a care for Palestinians, but he's writing it out of saying,
concern for
Israel's
the future of Israel.
a pariah state.
Right.
Israel's going to become a pariah state. Exactly. And so, You're totally right. I mean, it's there's no way that even the West is going to be able to back this anymore with what them openly saying we're doing ethnic cleansing, openly targeting whatever housing is left, openly doing a total food blockade, total medicine blockade, openly, as you're saying, burning people alive, which is the definition of a Holocaust, and targeting refugee tents and setting the whole thing on fire and killing everyone, burning people alive. So I mean, this has been the plan the whole time. This is why Netanyahu said, "I don't care about targets, bomb houses." This is why IDF snipers were shooting kids in the head. This is why they were bombing hospitals. This is why they were bombing women's shelters. This is why 70% of the people killed were women and children. Like this was always the intention, but you can't even hide it anymore. And that's why it's so crazy that outlets like the Free Press are still denying it. Like it was always bogus, but there's no hiding it or denying it anymore. And I can't believe that anyone would really fall for the propaganda.
Well, and the other propaganda that we see a lot is when they say that, well, the population of Gaza has actually increased since October. So wait, what? So they bombed every single thing. They've made them run for their lives. Pregnant women don't have maxi pads or any kind of supplies for dealing with women issues. They're killing all of they've destroyed all the incubators. They destroyed the fertility clinic. I saw you mention that had over 4,000 embryos in it. But yet the population is increasing. While dropping 2,000-pound bombs at record numbers and leveling 80% of the entire area. Methinks some gaslighting is happening here. And I'm glad that you're calling this out and writing it and documenting it for the future. My advice to you would be to make sure that if you are not regularly backing up your Substack articles or having them stored somewhere securely that is not on this platform, to start doing so. And the reason why is because Mark Andreessen is an influential Zionist, and he is a funder of this platform. Andreessen Horowitz backs both this platform as well as Stripe, which is the sole monetization arm behind this platform. So my feeling is that at some point they're going to come for all of us. I just saw an article or a post on Twitter about somebody who was questioning some of the COVID stuff. She's now been completely demonetized, and Stripe, they debanked her in order to get her her new bank account connected to Stripe. They want biometric stuff, which she's not willing to give over. So right now she has no way to monetize. That's our friend Zoe from the Thrill Kill Medical Cult. My concern.
Wow, I'll have to cover that story. I didn't even know about that.
Well, this literally is breaking as we're talking here, but she's been talking about how they debanked her for a little bit. She reached out to me last week, but they are starting to. And look, Yves Engler up in Canada was charged with harassment by a Zionist because
yes.
Okay, that was another case. You're a Canadian. Right, by the lunatic Dahlia. All right. He spent 5 days in jail because of this charge. All right. After turning himself in peacefully, they then held him over an entire holiday weekend in jail, and then they lost his paperwork for an extra day. He wasn't released until like 6 p.m. on Monday night. He turned himself in on Thursday. And they are, and look, they're going after Richard Medhurst. We've seen that. They've gone after Craig Murray, and they've gone after a ton of different journalists. We talked about Sunday night on How Do We Miss That? Reporters Without Borders, and how they've been a tool for Western imperialism. Our friend Tyler Popp from the Fix Collective put together outstanding Twitter threads about that. And this all links together. The crazy thing is what we've been talking about for the last hour and a half, what I talked about with Tyler, what I talked about with Gen X Girl multiple times. It's all being driven by this tiny little country in the Middle East that is fanatical and maniacal on making sure that they retain the land that was stolen and handed to them, quote unquote, that they continue to fight to make sure that they steal even more of and eradicate the people that they took it from. And there's got to be a reckoning at some point for all of this.
Exactly, and I mean you hit the nail on the head. It's, you know, you've got the UK Foreign Office sending the information of the Israeli embassy to the UK counterterrorism police, and then originally all these cases against Palestine Action for their protest under counterterrorism, and then eventually cases against journalists for writing about this. Richard Medhurst, Asa Winstanley, Richard Barnard, Sarah Wilkerson, Craig Murray, and actually recently there has been actually a positive development in this, and that court ruled that the
seizing of Asa Winstanley's devices was illegal. They needed to return it to him.
Exactly, but what is the word I'm thinking?
The raid? You talking about the raid?
Oh, I gotta have it in mind, but not the raid. You know, the justification, like the warrant for seizing Asa Winstanley's property was illegal, and they had to give back all his devices. And so hopefully there's a ruling for Medhurst and all these other cases that it was illegal. I don't know if there will be, but so you've got the Israeli embassy in the UK pushing that. You've got Beitar USA working with the Trump administration to deport legal residents for writing articles and taking part in Palestine protests. You've got Mario Feher, who's the psychotic Zionist foreign minister in Switzerland, getting Ali Abunimah arrested to prevent him
from speaking at a conference and imprisoning him over an entire weekend. We and then deporting him to Turkey. We covered that extensively. Yes. Again, what they have been doing to anyone that is publicly speaking out on a regular basis. What's really interesting, though, is that for some reason, Katie Halper, thankfully, has managed to avoid any of this so far, because she has done a couple of really powerful videos. I know you covered one where she talked about the Hebrew language and how it had evolved from Yiddish, but that Yiddish was banned from being spoken. And of course, that Hebrew was an artificial language on its own that was made up by the Israelis after 1948. That was a language that was never spoken. Crazy.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think specifically for, at least for now, for American citizens, there hasn't been much in terms of lawfare campaigns like there has been in the UK, but it's getting close to that. Like, that's why they're starting with legal residents, so that the, MAGA cultists can say, well, they're not actually citizens, so it doesn't count. But I mean, that's the logical next step, is they're going to start doing it to citizens. And so I think that's why, at least in America so far, people that are citizens haven't faced at least any charges yet under terrorism for speaking out on Palestine. But I mean, I feel like it's really coming very close to that.
Matter of time. I say to everyone, I'll see you in CCOT, because I think we're all going to end up deported there at some point for speaking out. They have been, look, the Trump admin has been talking about deporting American citizens for speaking out on behalf of the Palestinian people against Israel, murdering them, which is bonkers. Absolutely. But where are you going to send me? Where are you going to send me? I lived my whole life here. I know nothing but the United States. And of course, that means that I would have to, and not just me, but other people, they're paying tons of money toward lawyers to avoid being sent God only knows where. And who knows what they have even left by the time they get there to support themselves, set themselves up. Will they have to learn a foreign language to be able to assimilate to a brand new culture that may or may not even be willing to take them? Will we be stripped of U.S. passports and then be denied, like the Palestinian people, the right to travel freely between countries? Or will we be stuck in the country where we are deported to as criminals for speaking out against Israelis? It's beyond bonkers the way that we're even going down this path to have this discussion. And I don't really like hearing about it, honestly, or discussing it. It scares the hell out of me, especially as an anti-Zionist Jewish person, that all of this is allegedly being done in my name and on behalf of the thing that they think that, or that they claim that I, as a Jewish person, want, need, and demand, which I don't. Not at all. Fuck Israel. I will say it straight up. Fuck Israel. All right.
Well, and I mean, that's, you talk about, making you nervous. I mean, that's the point of all these cases. And me too. Like, I remember when I first covered the UK Terrorism Act case against Richard Medhurst, that, like, that really sent a chill down my spine. 'Cause it's like, oh, you can go after journalists just for writing articles and making videos that tell the truth about what Israel's doing in Gaza, or the history of what Israel's done to the Palestinians, or the Israel lobby. And I mean, especially the Yves Engler case, because that's, I'm in Ottawa, that's not far from me.
Right.
And you have this psychotic, like, Beitar USA level Zionist who openly says, like, half of Gazan civilians are guilty, and, Gazan children or Palestinian children in Gaza are, guilty and they're legitimate targets, like an openly genocidal maniac in Dahlia Kurtz, and Yves Engler correctly calling her a genocidal maniac, and the police actually arresting him based on that completely fabricated charge. And I mean, it's obviously a coordinated campaign from people like her, groups like Beitar US, and even in the UK, the Israeli embassy, or people like Mario Feher in Switzerland. It's like they all want to, create a chill effect to make people stop speaking out for Palestine and against Israel's war crimes and genocide, to scare people. That's the point.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up for today. I really appreciate your time always. I love reading your stuff, and I'm glad that you're back and writing. You're taking a bit of a hiatus, but I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing now and calling it out and giving me material to cover on my show, because more and more journalists just are disappointing in their takes and whatever, but consistent. I appreciate so tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, the 307.substack.com, or the Dissident, and then leftist_news12 on Twitter. But the vast majority of my stuff is on Substack. And yeah, I've covered all of this, the history of Netanyahu and the Israel lobby, the story on the Free Press. I've covered all of these censorship stories on critics of Israel and supporters of Palestinians. So if you want to read more, and if you want to, I don't just write, I also link to my sources on this. So if you want to read more about this, check out my Substack, and I've also linked to all my sources on that. So if you want to read even further, you can click the links and read the sources.
Yeah, man. Really, really appreciate your time. Really appreciate the work you put in. Everybody go support the Dissident, go support independent media. I'm going to show one time before we get out of here. These are the supporters that support INN, that have contributed and tipped our network. The ways that you can do that are via Cash App, $ Indie News Network, ko-fi.com/Indie News Network, paypal.me/Indie News Network, and at INNnewsletter.com, or at my Substack, IndieMediaToday.com. All of those places are the best places to give. They take the least amount of fees and they put the most amount of money in our pocket, and they try to keep us platform independent. So the newsletters, like I said, I'm a little worried about Andreessen Horowitz and Stripe. So I would prefer to do the Cash App and the PayPal, and if those, but all of those are connected to the PayPal mafia or the banking cartel or whatever it is. We're scrambling to try to figure out what to do long term for a way to have people support independence in general, even if it's setting up our own co-op and payment processor outside of their system. I think we should start looking at everything. But for now, I just wanted to again say thank you to the Dissident. Thank you to everybody who's watching, and we will see you again soon at INN One-on-One. This has been Indy, and this guy over there is the Dissident. Have yourselves a great day, and we will see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Support independent media. We need it more than ever.
Thanks for.
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say? You prove it's possible to sleep for days, and I still think you're right here away. The cost of living isn't much to make, but God, it's so hard to say. And when they told you everything was safe, were you safe? Were you safe? Were you safe? cancerous growth, who has come here to fight.